In February, heads of state, top-ranking government and military officials, and leaders of international organizations traditionally gather in Germany. The movers and shakers of the global geopolitical scene meet at the Munich Security Conference to debate defense and foreign policy issues. In 2013, then US Vice President Joe Biden said, "Munich is the place to go to hear bold policies announced, new ideas and approaches tested, old partnerships reaffirmed, and new ones formed." With changing political dynamics among world leaders, this and similar meetings are now taking on extra importance.
Nous sommes bousculés par les tentatives d'intrusion dans le cyberespace et l'intervention d'ailleurs dans notre vie démocratique de plusieurs. Nous devons nous protéger à l'égard de la Chine, de la Russie et même des États-Unis d'Amérique.
But how bad are the prospects for managing global tensions and trouble spots? What risks and opportunities lie ahead in 2019? We'll find out more from Wolfgang Ischinger, chairman of the Munich Security Conference, as he talks to Al Jazeera. Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, thanks so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It seems, looking at recent developments from the rise of the Trump presidency, the rise of nationalism in Europe, Brexit, is the transatlantic alliance collapsing from within?
Not really.
Is it weakening then?
Well, it has a problem. But quite frankly, I can't think of a decade when the transatlantic alliance didn't have a problem of this or that sort.
But this is different,
the
right?
The current problem is a little more severe than earlier problems, because the current problem tends to go to the heart of the matter, to the reliability of this transatlantic community.
So it's not just about severity, sir, right? This is for the first time, perhaps, that since World War II, you have to look with some skepticism or doubt or cautiousness towards the support from the US.
Well, yes and no. I think you need to make, if you want to be, precise, you want to make a distinction between, let's say, the tweets and the action on the ground. The action on the ground, as far as US participation in NATO is concerned, as far as the US presence, military presence in Europe is concerned, things are fine. In fact, I would go as far as saying that the Trump administration is doing a better job being present in Europe than the Obama administration in the last 8 years before Trump. So it's not all bad. What is less...
Maybe you'd say that even with all the tweets, the US president had surprised many people in the Western alliance for his praise for Russia's president, the leader of North Korea.
I was just going to say.
You would still say that's a better...
That's the downside. That is where doubts have been created about the reliability of the United States as a major ally in this transatlantic community. But again, let's make sure that we understand that there is a clear commitment by the United States in the military field. The United States has not deserted Europe, but you are right, at the political level, some of the words spoken, some of the tweets tweeted have created uncertainties in the minds of many Europeans. That's bad.
Is it just about what we hear from some of the leaders, whether it's in the US or leaders of some of the rising forces on the right in Europe, or is it also about the changing mood of the masses? Some segments of the masses in the West now see political elites, business elites, as perhaps a bigger problem than Russia, for example. They see the press as the enemy of the people more than external actors. Does Western defense policy, has it caught up with that? Does it still speak for the mind of the masses on security and defense issues?
My view would be that there is still a very wide-ranging agreement among elites in Western Europe, European NATO members, and the United States about what needs to be done. In a way, you know, we are joined at the hip in a number of areas. There is no way for Western Europe to, for example, to defend itself when you think about nuclear weapons, because the American nuclear umbrella has been the instrument of protection for all these many non-nuclear weapons countries in Western Europe who are members of NATO.
And you have no doubt that will continue?
Well, I have no doubt that there is no practical, reachable, doable alternative to this.
But that's not the same thing.
Well, since there is no alternative, we have to do our best in order to make sure it will continue to exist and will continue to work.
But my point is, are we at a point where Europeans have to think of a backup plan, a plan B?
Well, I've always...
Even if you don't want an alternative to
I've
the US
always
support.
thought that we should, of course, continue to look for as much strategic sovereignty, independence, as is possible, absolutely. And for example, in the non-nuclear field of defense, in conventional defense, it's our own fault, we Europeans are totally dependent also on our big partner on the other side of the Atlantic. We could create, if we spend a little more money, if we spend our defense euro more efficiently, we could be far more effective and efficient. We could carry a significantly larger share of the defense burden if we did all that. So that's that's on our to-do list, and that's possible.
In addition, though, to carrying perhaps more of a burden when it comes to military budgets, is there a need for the elites in the West to start dealing with some of the concerns of the middle classes, which have, from their perspective, haven't been addressed appropriately by the current order? Here's an interesting fact I came across. Children in some US communities now have a shorter life expectancy than their parents for the first time since the end of World War II. It begs the question, can the current order prevail, whether we're talking of security and defense, without the needs of some of the Western middle classes to be addressed?
All our welfare, all our social expenditures, all our accumulated wealth, all our employment is worth nothing if we don't have security. Just imagine another war. We are, as we speak, having a war in the heart of Europe. Let's call a spade a spade. What's going on in Ukraine is a war. We have 10,000 people dead now since 2014. Please don't tell me that this is not something that we Europeans, we in the transatlantic community, need to worry about. So as a precondition for making life better for the kids in America and for creating a stable and safe future for all of us, the first precondition is to make sure our security arrangements work.
Do you think that external actors like Russia have succeeded in making connections with internal actors in the US which are opposed to the transatlantic alliance?
Modern technology, the internet, social media have created and are creating as we speak a totally new fabric of communication and of political relationships.
Is that challenging for the current security establishment?
It's challenging for everybody, and believe me, it's not only challenging for us what maybe Russia is trying to do or to prevent in Western societies. I think the one who is fearing this the most is President Putin himself. He needs to be fearful of the virus of Western democratic freedom entering Russian social life. And he got the first impression of this when he ran for re-election in 2011, and when all of a sudden in in large cities in Russia, people went to the streets. Wow, that had never happened before. So, the virus of global communication, of fake news, of manipulation of news, it works in all directions.
Does global communication like that always have to be a virus? Could not this technology open up better understanding and global cooperation?
Well, if we were in a cooperative mood, as we promised to be in 1990 when we signed the Charter of Paris, and when we all agreed, including the Soviet Union at the time, that we would respect our borders and honor territorial integrity, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Of course, from the Russian perspective, they would make the argument that actually it was the Western side that didn't keep its word in not expanding further eastwards after the collapse of the Berlin Wall.
Well, there was never such a promise. Look, I mean, I negotiated on behalf of Germany with my American, British, and many other colleagues the NATO-Russia Founding Act. And we negotiated for the better part of an entire year. Never once in 1995, 96, never once did the Russian Federation raise in these negotiations the accusation that we should actually not even need to negotiate because we had promised never to expand NATO. Russia negotiated with us in good faith the modalities of NATO enlargement. Therefore, it is just simply a piece of fake news if we're being told today that at some point in the past somebody promised to somebody that NATO wouldn't expand. It's just not true.
Will the rise of European nationalism perhaps undermine a more integrated European defense and security policy? It's not just about the dynamic between Europe and the US or Europe and Russia. There's an internal dynamic that's going on. We're hearing voices from within Europe that are not very keen on multilateralism.
You are absolutely right. We are having a pretty tough fight about whether we can maintain, we in Western Europe, a position as a bulwark, as a pillar of the liberal international order, which is under rather dramatic threat today.
So where does that leave plans that we hear from time to time from the French president or others talking about it's time to beef up and make a more common European defense policy or army and so on?
It's inevitable, it's necessary. Look, if there is a question mark about the reliability of our American partner, if we have a huge question mark about Russian intentions all around this zone surrounding Russia, we have military issues, let me put it diplomatically. Of course, we need to hedge, we as Europeans, we need to hedge against the possibility that there might be yet another military issue coming our way. That is unfortunately the case. I wish I could.
How do you hedge that if a portion of the masses are losing faith, shall we say, in multilateral action and are becoming stronger in their beliefs for nationalistic or unilateral action?
Well, I actually don't think that that's going to happen. I have listened to too many doom and gloom predictions of the immediate, demise of the Eurozone, of Europe collapsing.
Aren't we already, some might say, seeing that with Brexit? We are seeing
No, we're
parts
not
of
seeing
Europe
it.
losing faith in the European project?
No, we're not seeing it. We are actually seeing that a number of countries have only one wish for their future, namely to become members of the European Union. Brexit is unfortunate. It was a wrong decision, and it was wrongly presented to the British people. I belong to those who believe it is a catastrophic mistake for all of us on the continental side, but also for the British people themselves. And I just wish it could somehow be reversed, but that's for the UK, of course, for the British Parliament, for the people to decide.
Do you buy into the analysis that says the rise of populism in the West, the rise of nationalism, unilateralism, is leaving vacuums in other parts of the world, like the Middle East, where others are filling it?
Well, one thing is true. We have been so preoccupied in the European Union with the fallout of the financial crisis for the entire last decade, for the last 10 years. We've been preoccupied with doing our own homework, our domestic cleanup job,
That you can't pay enough attention to others?
And the idea that the European Union would define itself as an exporter of stability, that was the original idea we had, 20 years ago or so. That has so far not materialized.
Is it taking a setback now? I mean, you're here for the Doha Forum in Doha, Qatar. A lot of people from around the world are here, but this is a region that is plagued with a boycott led by Saudi Arabia in the heart of the Gulf against Qatar. I mean, surely that puts a strain on regional stability and security, which the West has an interest in, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm the first to say that the European Union should be far more capable than it is today to speak with one voice and to defend and represent the interests of 500 million people. That's the European Union.
What should the EU say, in your opinion, concerning the boycott?
Well, let me go back a step. First, the European Union needs to be able to define a policy vis-à-vis all the issues of the Middle East. Yemen, Syria, Libya, and the list is of course much longer. We don't have a consolidated, clearly defined policy approach because in the European Union on foreign policy, we still allow each and every single member to have a veto about every single issue that is presented to our foreign ministers.
Would you like to see the EU make a stronger call for an end to this boycott as a threat to the regional alliance with the West?
Well, of course, from the European point of view, what is required for this region is a reliable security architecture. The blockade or the dispute between Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states is extremely regrettable. It's the last thing we need. What we need is a united Gulf. What we would love to see is a united Arab world that starts thinking like we did half a century ago in Europe about integration, close cooperation, transporter, transporter trade and exchange.
Did the West let the Arab world down, though, in a sense, on that point when we saw the beginning, some would argue, of that process with the Arab Spring? First having accountable, representative, democratic governments who could then work on integration from the perspective, the true perspective of the interests of the masses rather than regimes. And there is a feeling in this part of the world the West didn't come to the aid of that democratic revolution and experiment as quickly as it should have. Do you agree with that?
I would admit that personally I belong to those who were probably too naive when the so-called Arab Spring broke out. Many of us thought, okay, this is now the opening, and from now on everything will be fine, and this part of the world will end up in paradise. Well, we underestimated the forces that were against such an opening. And we underestimated the weakness of democratic institutions and processes in many of these countries. So now we're
But that's a reason to support them more, surely, not rather than to turn away from them.
Well, we tried, did we not? I mean, maybe we didn't do it in the right way. We thought, for example, that it was going to be a great idea to create one or two shining examples. If that was one thought over these last number of years, if we could help turn, for example, Tunisia into an example of how these processes of modernization can actually be conducted in a peaceful manner for the benefit of the people, that would be great. Well,
that experiment is
some experiments seem to have gotten
further
forward
than
a
others.
little bit, but not. But certainly not a full success.
Has the killing of Jamal Khashoggi weakened the West's confidence in Saudi Arabia in particular as a reliable partner in security and stability?
The fact that in our current international climate, it is apparently deemed acceptable by governments even of major countries that such activities as the one you describe in Istanbul, or the poisoning of a couple, a Russian couple living in England, is acceptable or is not going to be punished by the international community. This is awful. This is one of the symptoms of the disintegration of our international system.
Do you think there should be an international investigation then into Khashoggi's killing?
I think that would be helpful.
Do you think the Saudi investigation has been credible so far? We've been
well, any such investigation is going to be more credible if it is going to support it by an international effort. And I think that Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders have suggested that to the Saudi leadership.
I mean, it's been how many weeks since the killing? Saudi authorities still haven't accounted for his body. That doesn't give a lot of confidence in the investigation, does it?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the investigation because I know nothing about it. But what I do know is that as we speak, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress is deliberating what the right steps and what the wrong steps are going to be. No country is, for Saudi Arabia, more important than the biggest NATO partner, the United States. If the United States takes certain steps, that would be setting an example. If the United States decides not to do anything and just go back to business as usual, that would be setting a different kind of example. So I think in this particular case, whatever the United States decides to do or not to do will have an immensely important role for all of us.
Do you think the US should go for the sorts of measures which your country, Germany, has taken? Germany has stopped arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Do you think the US should do the same?
I think the important thing is that we do something together. It's not a great idea, I think, for one country, regardless of whether this is Germany or other country, to take this kind of decision, others taking no decisions, third countries like the US contemplating congressional action. I think the best way forward here, the best way to work with Saudi Arabia is to develop one common position.
Should that be an arms boycott?
Well, I think an arms boycott, if it were applied throughout the Western world, would be an extremely strong signal. I don't really believe that that's what we're going to see. I think the arms boycott by my own country was a strong signal, but actually a signal of helplessness. You know, the German arms exports to Saudi Arabia are a tiny sum of money compared to what other countries are exporting to Saudi Arabia.
Is the transatlantic alliance breaking down, not just in terms of European security, but in other global issues? We've seen differences between Europe and the US when it comes to trade, climate change, the Paris Accord, even the Iran nuclear deal.
No, I don't think so. We've had important differences of view on many, many issues in the past. So the transatlantic alliance will survive this, but with scars, because the tone of this debate, including sometimes the words chosen by President Trump himself, have turned out not to be helpful if you want to maintain an atmosphere of mutual trust.
We're not that far away from the Munich Security Conference itself having its gathering. What sort of direction do you expect the conference to take on some of these global challenges we're talking about?
Well, you know, the Munich Security Conference has developed into what I think is now the world's most important informal foreign policy and security platform each year in February in Munich. The beauty of Munich is we don't produce a communique. We don't take decisions. We use the time in Munich for the leaders who gather there to have meaningful discussions about whether there are maybe some possibilities to move forward. And we expect to have key leaders, decision makers, from the United States, from China, from the Middle East. I know now that a number of heads of state and government, including from this region, will want to come and speak in Munich. That's good, but it's an informal club, and that is what makes informal decisions so much easier than in a formal setting such as the United Nations or in our case in the EU or in NATO.
Mr. Wolfgang Ischinger, Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, thanks so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.